Welcome to Climify, the podcast that connects climate scientists and design educators together so that we can help combat our climate crisis in our classrooms. The discussions on this program are geared to help you climify your syllabi to assign projects that not only teach design fundamentals, but also can have a positive impact on our climate.
This episode is brought to you by Renourish. Renourish is your one-stop online resource for sustainable design and systems thinking strategies and tools for the graphic designer. You can learn more about Renourish on their website at renourish.org, or you can follow them on Twitter and Facebook at Renourish.
Hi, I'm Weslynne Ashton. I'm an associate professor of environmental management and sustainability at the Illinois Institute of Technology, where I sit in a joint appointment between the Stewart School of Business and Institute of Design, and also have a courtesy appointment in the Department of Civil and Architectural and Environmental Engineering. And I work on system sustainability, so thinking about how we can transition our current economic systems towards more sustainability and equity. And you can learn more about my work at iit.edu.
That's Weslynne Ashton. She's a professor at IIT in Chicago. A few years ago, I learned about her work in systems thinking as I was embarking on my own path and learning about systems thinking. For a couple years now, I've been following what she's been doing and have been greatly inspired by all the interesting work that she is doing, especially how to teach systems thinking and why life-centered systems thinking is so important for the designer so that they can be a part of the climate action that is needed for our society and planet. So I'm happy that Weslynne is here, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome, Weslynne, to Climify. I'm excited that you are here, and I've been meaning to reach out to you for actually about a year now. I discovered you a while ago based on the work you do up there at IIT, and I'm glad that you accepted the invitation to be on the program.
Well, I'm very excited to be here and share a bit of the work that we're doing and also be engaged with the Climify audience.
Yeah, definitely. And that engagement, right, with your work is something that I hope to talk a lot about today. And I'm really interested in how you got to where you are at IIT and your interest in sustainability. And, you do a lot of things. You have a lot of overlaps there. And so I'm curious, just like, how did this all come to be?
I have my undergraduate training in environmental engineering. And I think from a very early age, growing up on a Caribbean island, Trinidad and Tobago, which was very industrialized, I saw the juxtaposition of industry and environment. And I wanted to think about how can our economic activities be situated to live more within the constraints of the ecosystems and the biophysical resources that we have. And so I was drawn to the field of industrial ecology, which is what I did my PhD work in. And that really focused on how we use different materials and energy in our industrial activities and develop strategies to use those resources more efficiently, but also to develop collaborations across different types of industry so that we can have industries operating more like an ecosystem rather than on their own. And so I started drawing on social network analysis, business management, so going beyond just engineering. Because this really became about, okay, well, who's making the decisions and what's their motivations for adopting more sustainable practices in their business activities. And so I landed in the Stewart School of Business at Illinois Tech about 12 years ago, particularly to teach in our master's degree program on environmental management and sustainability, but I also teach in the MBA program and our public administration programs. And then a few years ago, like the design folks are kind of over there. So they're actually like a completely different campus in Chicago, and so they were kind of away from everyone else. And about 5 years ago, they moved into the same building as the business school and the law school. And
design is with business and law.
It was.
Okay.
So there was like a 2-3 year period where they were temporarily co-housed with business and law, which are together. And that's on our downtown campus in the West Loop in Chicago. And that really created an opportunity for collaboration and intersection, right? It's easy to run upstairs or take the elevator.
Either one. But that's a cool thing, though, to have as a designer. I'm a designer.
Right.
With those two disciplines where, I mean, we're typically not at the big kids table like that. So that must have been pretty cool.
It is. And, we had, I think probably for at least 15 years, had a joint degree program between the business school and the Institute of Design. So it's an MDes MBA program. But we always had few students. And I think, kind of after this co-location is when that program really took off because I think people realized the synergies that really could happen when you combine. And our MBA is a bit more quantitative and design. So I say it's like the left brain, right brain combination. And so it's a really powerful synergy. But then about years is 22. So in 2018, we moved into a new building on the main campus at Illinois Tech.
Got it.
And the idea there is that we really want to center design in a lot of the work of the university, right? So we're now located in the middle of campus between natural science, engineering, computing, and so that opens up the space for a lot of new collaborations.
Yeah, that's kind of a nice metaphor too of design sort of centered in the core of what all of these other disciplines are doing, or as, a huge overlap.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
One of the things you said actually about growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, I caught my attention about what you saw there growing up. Can you go into more detail about, was there something in particular? Was there a moment? Was there, what drew you to all these things? Because it seemed like if this was when you were a kid, you were a really smart kid to start recognizing all of these connections out there in the world.
It's probably all in retrospect, right?
Right.
And then you can look back and say, okay, yeah, that was it. Trinidad is an oil economy. And so we produce oil, natural gas, have a large petroleum refinery. And, there are occasional oil spills. And there's a lot of air pollution. And so that, seeing oil spills in the natural environment, I would say it's, drove that interest. But Trinidad is also are ecologically part of South America.
Okay.
And so, when you think of the Caribbean, you think about, like these flat coral islands with white sand beaches. Trinidad has none of that, right? It's all rainforest and dense vegetation. very mountainous, and so it, I would say, um, yeah, it's more of a rainforest type ecology rather than um, a Caribbean island, ecology. And we have a bit of both because Tobago's more that white sand.
Oh, so they get the white sand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you saw basically not natural disasters, sorry, but human-made disasters, and it really affected your worldview on what we should be doing as inhabitants of this earth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I also had like an amazing set of geography teachers
Yeah.
in high school who you know were able to look at both the physical side as well as the human side of geography and expose me to that. And I think that was really important for
Yeah.
the shaping of that worldview and the place of us humans within it.
Yeah, isn't it good to think about the teachers that we had, right? That have affected us as we are also educators, you and I ourselves, and most of the audience listening here, how they have had a great impact on our lives. I remember in high school for me, I had a great art teacher, and I kept on telling her, like, I'm not going to art school. I'm not doing that. I'm going to be this business major. And she told me, you're never going to be a business major. And I took it as like an affront that, okay, I'm going to prove her wrong. But that's not what she meant. She just meant like she knew where my talents and passion was. So I'm glad to hear that your history teachers had a big impact on your future self. So I'm interested as well in, you went from a Caribbean life to Chicago, Illinois. How was that transition into the probably very cold Midwest?
Yeah. Well, before Chicago, I lived in Boston and Connecticut, so kind of up
Still cold.
the East Coast. Um, and I think in Chicago, I learned to dress better,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I could afford
You'd
to
have
dress
to.
better.
Yeah. Yes.
Like no longer being on a student salary,
Mm.
so a student stipend, and that I think made an important difference. But I definitely try to get to the Caribbean a lot.
Yeah.
And, yeah, not big into the winter sports and
No,
being outside if I don't need to.
no, you're not bobsledding there in Chicago.
Yeah, one of the things that I've wanted to do for years is to try to go skiing, and I'm like, just never,
Oh
never
yeah,
happened.
yeah. No, I've never been downhill skiing because my father like hurt both of his knees skiing, and he said never ski, and
Yeah.
I haven't. I took his. Well,
But it looks like great fun,
it does. It does. My in-laws ski, and they talk about how great it is, and I look up at the mountain and say, I'm a little bit afraid of heights. I don't think I'm going to be going down
Yeah.
like 30 miles an hour. Well, I wanted to ask you too about, I'm a big fan of systems thinking, right? And this is the work that you do. I've been trying to teach this in my class, and I'm really a fan of your work. And I wonder how you define systems thinking, and how do you use it there at IIT?
Sure. The starting point for me is trying to help my students see that we live in systems,
Mm.
right? And there's no problem that exists in and of itself. And coming from more an environmental background, like my framing is usually um, that we are part of a social, ecological, and technological system.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and, and so I often start off with that framing and using the work of people like Danella Meadows, um, and thinking in systems as a framework for seeing how different elements are connected to other elements and can have both intended and unintended consequences. So I've been teaching systems thinking and design um, class. I guess it's about two years now that I'm teaching at IB. And this last spring, I actually co-taught it with another colleague who brought in a completely different perspective
Mm-hmm.
that's really kind of more grounded in human and social systems. So her framing was thinking about um, like more from a psychological perspective, right? So humans are begin as part of family systems,
Right.
and but they're also systems of oppression, and so kind of more of like the political side. Um, and so where we landed in kind of combining these two approaches is thinking about the role of designers, right? Not only as someone who kind of comes in to observe and give recommendations and develop insight and innovations, um, but as being a part of that system and recognizing that who's in the room, and whose voice is represented, um, frames the conversation, right? And frames the insights that are developed. And so we ask our students to, kind of step back and from the onset, reflect on what are their worldviews, right? What are those ways of seeing the world that frame how they uh, come into the room? What are the biases that they have, so that when they're called in to be a designer on a particular project, there is some awareness of where they're coming from and how those biases might influence how they see the problem. And so, uh, so recognizing themselves, right? Like our own worldviews and biases, but also recognizing that everyone else in the room has those diverse perspective, potential biases, and so it's important to try to get those out in conversation, and so um, we've also been using the as one of the texts the work of Adrienne Marie Brown and emergent strategy, which takes this very organic approach for thinking about how we're related to systems, but centering sort of Black, Indigenous perspectives, and that we want to drive towards a systems change that's more equitable. And so we use systems thinking to kind of say, okay, what is the problem that I'm interested in? What are the various variables, the various actors who are involved? What's the distribution of power? What are the biases that come into play? And, how does more diverse perspectives being involved in that conversation change the shape of the solutions that be developed?
Yeah. Are these undergraduate or graduate students that you're working with in this class or classes?
Graduate. So our program is only at the graduate level.
Got it. How do the students, I asked this in a very biased way because I'm curious about how other people are teaching systems thinking. I'm teaching it to undergrads. How your students grasp it. Does it take a long time? How long does it take? How does it go for you?
Yeah. So I would say that um, at IB, we have a very international student population, right? So even though they're all graduate and so a little more mature, they're coming from different parts of the world. Many of them have design backgrounds. Several don't.
Right.
But almost universally, and maybe that's not true, but I would say, like for a large majority, they've not done reflections like this
Yeah, I have the
before.
same
And
experience.
and so, so it's something that they I wouldn't say struggle with, but it takes a reframing, but I think one that's really good and helpful for them um to think about how they show up.
hmm Yeah. With that in mind too, I'm curious about how, because you said it's not just designers in the room, but have you found strategies or ways that systems thinking is better understood for designers? As most of the people listening to this show probably are designers and would definitely benefit from that, your expertise there.
I would say that design students in general are very open,
hmm
to this, and because in my uh, systems thinking that I teach more in my engineering and business perspectives, it's a bit more cut and dry,
Yeah.
right? And I have the opportunity in our systems thinking class, just the way that it's structured, that we have the time to kind of delve more deeply and reflect
Mhm.
on these issues. I think in my other classes, I have like one or two sessions that's about systems thinking, and then it's like, okay, what are all the things that I need to cram in?
Well, yeah, that I have that same problem. Not enough time, basically.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But it does sound like IIT has like built in the curriculum systems thinking courses, which helps.
Yes, I mean, so we have a whole concentration area.
Wow, that's great. I'm
So,
jealous.
right. I mean, this is, yeah, I guess the luxury of a graduate,
Yeah.
program in design, uh, where like we have both 7 week sort of shorter seminar type classes, and so the systems thinking is one of those, as well as 14, 15 week workshop type classes where they get to go practice,
hmm
right? And so in our systems concentration area, and that is a really important, I would say, facet of the IB program. Um, we have kind of both the theory and application. We have visualizations, right? So someone teaches, okay, well, how do you, visualize these complex relationships in systems and communicate that to diverse audiences?
Yeah.
So I'd say, like, we have like a nice suite of 3, 4 classes
That's amazing.
in this space.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think would benefit the students a lot because as I'm trying to introduce it, first of all, the students tell me, okay, this is a completely different way of thinking and designing. I mean,
Yeah.
by definition, of course it is, right? Because you're not just going in and going right at the design problem. You're actually taking a step back and situating yourself in a network, different connections and relationships. And I think having a seminar like you described prior to them getting into a course where they are expected to make something, because, designers make things, would be so beneficial as opposed to taking, okay, I got to spend 3 to 4 weeks just talking about what this is. And here's Donella Meadows thinking in systems. Yeah, I think you're doing it right there because in my experience, they need that.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I think you're totally right, that it is a different way of thinking.
Mhm.
And I think perhaps, one of the best compliments that I get from my students is that after taking these classes, and that's either in design or, in business or engineering, that taking the systems thinking modules um, is something that changes them forever,
Yeah.
right? You can't just look at a product um, in the same way, right? And often the way that I bring this in is from an environmental life cycle perspective, right? So here's this product. What are all the hands that touched this thing before it got to you, right? What are the different types of resources that were mobilized to produce it? What energy was
Yeah.
used all along the supply chain
oil,
to transform it?
Yeah.
Yeah. The the energy to transport it, as well as the people, right? So, like, what were the working conditions of the folks who manufactured this product?
That's a huge thing.
And that perspective, I think, is really important to, especially for designers, right? I think
Yeah. To see
we,
everything is connected.
yeah, yeah. Like, human-centered design is such an important paradigm in design work, for the last half century.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to go beyond that, right? And think about
Yeah.
who are those other people, right? Not the users, but the workers.
Right, the fish, right? Yeah.
Right.
Is that, would you call that life-centered design?
I do. And I think, like, there are a couple different terms: planet-centered, life-centered design that folks are doing. And that's really something that I am focusing my research, my practice on a lot. And it's why I now sit in a joint appointment at ID, because we were really interested in kind of developing, uh, you know, professors, everybody wants to discover the new, best, innovative thing, right?
Exactly.
And so for us, that means developing tools and frameworks and methods that look to futures, that look at the broader perspectives, that look at how purpose can be integrated into design. So
The common good, right?
yeah, so we have a number of faculty, kind of more in the digital space, more in the future space. I'm in the environmental, planetary sustainability space. We have folks in health. So really thinking about, like what are ways that design needs to transform itself, to really engage more deeply and develop solutions that consider what might be the unintended consequences,
Exactly.
And really create a more holistic um, framing for understanding the impacts. And I think it's one thing to understand the impacts. The next step is about weighing, right? And thinking about, okay, like, what are the trade-offs that you have to make, right? So if we focus on reducing the carbon footprint of a particular product or process, what might be other environmental impacts or other social impacts if we decide uh, to use solar energy instead of fossil fuel energy, right? So what jobs are displaced? And so there are frameworks like multi-criteria decision analysis, right, that come from engineering that we might use to say, okay, how can we weigh these things? And that's not something that uh, designers put a lot of emphasis
No, they don't.
on.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on the same wavelength here. This is why I was so happy that you came onto the show. I have also agreed throughout the years that life-centered design is really what designers need to be practicing. And the only way I could think to get there was through this idea of systems thinking and connecting everything. And I'm wondering about your success stories or student aha moments that you've had over the years? Because I have a few that I thought were like, oh, wow. Like once they started mapping out this connected systems, they would say, this can go on forever, right? Like they can go I only said take 30 minutes and do this. And they were like, we need longer. We need like 2 hours. We need like 2 days. Do you have any really good success stories from your classes or your own work too? Because you do a lot of great work.
Yeah, so let me just respond to that comment, and say that, I give them a time limit, right? So I like your 30 minutes. I say, okay, yeah, precisely. You can spend weeks kind of fleshing out the full circles and the relationships. Start at the question, what are you interested in? Right. And then think about, okay, who are those key actors and what are the actions that they're taking that lead to that problem? And don't spend more than 2 hours on this.
Impossible. Did they write something or did they visualize like a map? Or like, what do they do?
Yeah. So we do a lot of Miro boards.
Yeah, Miro, yeah, online teaching, Miro has saved a lot of us.
Yeah. And then, like for the end of the course, they have to do, a mapping, identify some intervention actions, points, and just kind of explain what they think the consequences, the first order and second order consequences might be of that intervention.
I feel like I'm doing it right because I'm hearing what you're doing. Okay. I feel like
validated.
Yeah, validated. That's the right word. Another V word.
So as far as success story, I want to give a case, and it's actually one of the cases where I first started working with the design team and had a PhD student from ID join my industrial ecology course. And so this is probably about 5 years ago. And we were working with a group of companies in Chicago at a facility called The Plant. And these are all small businesses that are very environmentally conscious. They want to think about how to be more efficient, their practices, but they're also part of a community of similar-minded folks. So we had done an analysis looking at material and energy flows, identifying how much waste was being generated, where that waste was going, and using that information to identify opportunities for synergies between companies. So, you have this waste. That person needs a similar material. Can you think about how to transform it in a way? Yeah, to close the loop.
Exactly.
Right? And make a circular economy. And our design student came in and kind of asked the question, what's motivating what would motivate the people to pursue these types of connections? It's kind of very in line with what I'm doing. But instead of just focusing on, the material flows, started having one-on-one conversations with different people, owners, workers within the facility, and really kind of got a very nuanced understanding of what some of the barriers were. Mm-hmm. In the end, we realized that we needed a whole sort of change management process that required people to co-create a vision for what a circular economy means for all of them, right? And to continuously update, kind of bring new people in and create structures to facilitate information sharing. But as a part of that, we realized that folks weren't just interested in exchanging waste, right? That there are a lot of knowledge resources being generated and being shared, right? There's labor being exchanged, right? And in some ways, very informally, oh, I need a hand to do this.
Right.
And in some ways, more formally, it's like, oh, let's do a joint marketing effort, right? And then we can co-create a product, and we're going to kind of share that out to our different audiences. And so looking at this and then drawing on the work of resource-based theory, we saw that there were different types of capital, different types of resources that were being mobilized here. And so we developed a framework to think about how different stocks of capital, human capital, social capital, could be mobilized to implement sustainability solutions, circular economy solutions. And so we, kind of developed out a framework, tested it in a couple of different settings, and that multi-capital framework is now being taken up in some different spaces that I work in. And I think it's really nice to see how that framework gives the language for talking about different types of value that's being created. Right? And just to kind of close the loop on this conversation, so I do quite a bit of work around advancing sustainability and equity in urban food systems in Chicago. And this multi-capital framework has been adopted by one of the groups, and it's called the Community Food Navigator, as a way to articulate the social value, the nutritional value, the community benefits that urban farmers provide in addition to pounds of food and dollars of income.
Is this framework somewhere that we could access or?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Where?
I'll send you the link.
And I'll put the link up for our listeners too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we're going to pause here just for a few minutes for some commercial messages. And when we get back, we're going to talk more about how systems thinking can help with climate action.
Do you want to help design a better world? Start by subscribing to Evolve CPG, a podcast featuring the purpose-driven entrepreneurs, executives, and consultants behind the most impact-driven brands in the world. You'll learn how innovative leaders are leaning into their purpose, how better for the world brands are scaling positive impact, and how the product industry is solving some of the world's biggest problems. Be part of the evolution. Find Evolve CPG wherever you get your podcasts and visit evolvecpg.com to learn more.
Looking to take your industrial design career to the next level? For over 50 years, the Industrial Designers Society of America has worked to advance the practice of industrial design and enrich the professional lives of members. Join IDSA today for professional development and continuing education for each stage of your career, exclusive discounts on events and award programs, access to members-only content, community leadership opportunities, and much more. Go to idsa.org/JOIN for more information and use code JOIN25 to save $25 on a new professional membership.
We're back and really enjoyed this first half of our conversation. And I am a fan of systems thinking, as I've said before, and have been a fan of your work too for a while. And I'm curious how you're using systems thinking, or how you think systems thinking can be better used by designers, by business, by engineering to help with our current climate crisis.
Great question.
It's a tough question, right?
It is.
Put you on the spot.
One of the other classes that I teach is design for a changing climate. And
Perfect, right?
and it I don't have it as a prereq, but almost all of the students who take it have also taken my systems thinking class, and so that um, grounding um, serves as the basis for the work that we do in the climate design class. We start off, and actually I would say that most of the classes that I teach, and of course this is based on the fact that I'm an engineer, background in business, and now design.
Yeah.
Combine all three,
Yeah.
right? And I think to be effective in this space, we have to have some basic understanding of the science.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
And in my design for climate change class, I use two texts. One that's more on the technical side, and the book that I'm currently using is Robert Henson's The Thinking Person's Guide to Climate Change.
The Thinking Person's Guide to Climate Change. I like that.
And I think it's fairly accessible, but it is the science.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage the students to kind of dive in as much as possible. And then on the more humanist side, we use All We Can Save by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson.
Good book.
And use that to tell the stories, right? And to I think it's very inspiring. The students have said, it's something they really enjoy reflecting on and being able to talk about it. And the stories that are in there are about solutions. And like many of it is kind of like very grassroots, it's very feminist.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a great perspective. But the point that I'd make is that, right, so we need to understand the science, and we need to be able to tell the stories. So the types of things that I have my students in this class do is, right, think about, okay, if there's a particular problem, a particular region, like what are those connections that are leading to increased emissions? What might be some types of interventions we could use to mitigate emissions? So we talk about mitigation, we talk about adaptation, we talk about resilience, and I typically have them, do some kind of, like intervention strategy that they have to visualize and communicate, and kind of analyze more deeply. In the broader scheme, I think there's absolutely a role for designers, and that having a life cycle, a life-centered design framing will help us to better understand what are those implications of whatever it is we're designing, a product, a service, a systems change, across people, across places, and different impact categories, right? So the industrial ecologists are kind of like very attuned to saying that we can't only focus on carbon, right? That we also need to think about water, right? And water scarcity, and there are lots of
California
there.
It has that problem,
right? And so we need to be able to see the whole picture, and climate, I think, is the most visible, and certainly like on a planetary perspective has the largest impact. But we also need to think about localized impacts and impacts on ecosystems, on human health, on ecological health, as well as the planet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, last season and then this season, kind of as a response to things that we learned from the last season of this program, was that um, better stories need to be told. I think systems thinking can play a role in that. But I'm curious what you think about this other part of it, and that is that I'm going to use the word rebrand. May not be the best word, but this is something that came up last season. Was we really need to rethink how we're talking about both climate change and sustainability? And I'm just curious about your own personal opinion on that. Do we need to do that? And if so, what can we do? How can we do it?
I have a pair of colleagues, uh, Gabriel Grant and Jason Jay, who've written a book called Breaking Gridlock.
Breaking gridlock. Okay.
Yeah. And they talk about how we have difficult conversations with people who have different opinions.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and
Our lives right now.
right. And it can be in many realms. But sustainability and climate change are kind of like a big part of it.
Yes.
But the way that they approach this is thinking about, like we have to start one-on-one, right?
Mm.
And I believe I saw Catherine Hayhoe, maybe in like one of her Twitter things, talk about, like we have to have one-on-one conversations with people and understand where there's common ground. So what are the things that we care about? And designers will get this. Build empathy.
Yeah.
So it's sort of something that we're supposed to be able to do well. To really understand kind of like what are the things that people care about, and then not use that to think, oh well, you should also care about this. But to to co-create, to kind of think about, okay, well, like what are the things that we can agree on, and what are those actions that help to achieve multiple goals.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen some good articles about that where it's not about using that term climate change, but it's finding that common ground term that maybe two very divergent groups, like clean water, right? Or safe for my family, right? And then they find maybe a common path forward for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about the fact that environmental conservation is certainly in the United States, but probably other parts of the Western world, started as a very racist, exclusionary practice of taking land from Native people, conserving that land, preserving it for the exclusive use of folks with money and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we have to address. And so when we talk about climate, environmental conservation, the racism in that past and present needs to be addressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Last week we had a workshop in Chicago on food waste, and we tried to bring in diversity of voices, but one kind of theme that came up in that conversation was about how those of us in the room, kind of come from positions of privilege.
Right.
And if we really want to create solutions that are more equitable and inclusive, then we're going to need to cede some of that privilege and power.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that most of us, don't even know kind of, okay, well, what does that actually mean?
Yeah. Well, how could
Um, and yeah, and how to do it in a way that's not patronizing, and patriarchal.
Sure.
And so I think, like that's something that I think we need to do, right? So it's creating space for more diverse voices to be a part of the conversation. It's, uh, honoring, respecting the value of the knowledge of those diverse perspectives and empowering them, right? With money, with resources, to be able to make and implement and scale the changes that um, they know, like maybe they've, started working on, but because of how power and financial capital is distributed and hoarded in our society, that they don't have access to be able to really make those changes.
Yeah. So it's, like with the way I understand that, and have experienced it before at my university, it's, people that look like me, been here a while, white men, um, need to step aside at times, right? And um, let others have their voices heard, lead, and have the resources to lead, not just like, hey, here's this job, good luck.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's universities are hierarchies, right? And
Yeah, they are.
we're part of it. And I mean, even for myself, like as a Black woman, but one who, did not grow up in the US,
Right.
like I'm also very cognizant of kind of like how I approach spaces. I'm very cautious about what information I share. I would say through years of work and trust building and building social capital, I'm now engaged in kind of this food systems transformation work in Chicago. But there are things that are said there. Like there's work that's being done that I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to be able to publish this,
Right.
and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Because the value of the knowledge that I am bringing into this conversation um, is not. It's not about me. It's not about recognition for university. It's not about a publication, but it is that
Yeah.
giving up of power and privilege, so that the knowledge that's being shared is really for community benefit. And in some ways, I feel like I have developed a really thick skin
Yeah.
and being like, okay, I'm not gonna, have the best publication record or the best paper award, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, but you're creating great impact, right? It's like, that's the value, really. You're doing.
Yeah, yeah,
I think invariably too, when you're talking about systems with your students or in your own work, right? Like that topic of race, these sort of uncomfortable areas for many invariably happen because they're all connected together, right? And so that's been a huge challenge for me. Like when that does happen, right? What do you do? What do you
yeah,
do as the educator? And specifically, I'm a white male, and like I have to educate myself, right, about how to do that, not just how to teach systems thinking. It's
hmm hmm
it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And, myself included, right? And as I said, I didn't grow up in the US. And so there are,
Right.
kind of like many nuances that,
Culturally,
yeah, that I feel
socially.
like
Yeah.
not in tuned in. But now, like in our systems thinking class, the fact that we talk about oppression, we talk
Mhm.
about political structures, and racism, sexism, and biases, um, that it's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? And
And it should be, I
yeah,
think. I think it should.
um, right, and we have to kind of learn to sit in that discomfort, right? That this is not going to be easy. And yeah, I mean, certainly giving up power. Yeah,
Yeah. It's a
it's
challenge.
yeah, yeah, right. I mean, like I think about, so in industrial ecology, and I would say in kind of environmental science, um, we talk about an equation that's called IPAT. So I is equal to PAT, where I is impact, P is population, A is affluence, T is technology.
Hmm.
And the eco-modernist framing says that technology is the lever that we pull, right? Like we can't do anything about population. We
Yeah.
can't do anything about affluence, right? Like the population is growing. People want more stuff.
Yeah.
So
Nobody's
so
waking up.
therefore so therefore we can only fix technology and figure out how to be more efficient, how to close the loop,
A better app.
how to mitigate
Right.
our emissions. But the P and the A levels are also important, right? And like
Yeah.
very important if we think about um, our climate impact, large scale ecological impact. So, how many humans are on the planet are in a particular region utilizing resources, right? And how do we change P? Education, right? And
Right.
particularly girls' education.
Exactly.
And we've been very hesitant to touch the A, affluence, right? Because everyone needs more.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. It's a
but
tough one.
yeah, but I think, like an important understanding here is that, those of us who live in the global north, right? Uh, and I say global north, but I mean, anywhere in the world where you have a lot of money relative to everybody else,
Hmm.
um, are going to have to give up things, right? And I think that that's something that many of us are not prepared to do.
I agree. Yeah.
And so in thinking about how we rebrand climate change and sustainability, I think we absolutely have to tackle affluence and what it means to have a good quality of life, right? So the classic American example is, right, your standard single family home with your two cars and your white picket fence,
Yep.
and that cannot be our future, because if everyone on the planet lived like that, we would need several hundred more planets.
Right. It's too much. Yeah. That is the idea of like less is more. Like how
Yeah,
can you live a life where you don't need all these artifacts around you?
right. And so I think that's the rebranding that needs to happen.
Good. Yeah.
It's about how do you live a high quality life with less stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Less stuff, less space.
We gotta figure that out.
Right. And that is more equitable and really, kind of like gives an opportunity for more people to have enough.
Hmm. Well, on that note, we're up to my last and favorite question, which I think might um, be affected by everything you just said. But I'm curious for you if you were given the freedom and resources to teach a dream course on this or a project, what would you do? What would you assign?
Well, incidentally, I'm building one of these right
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You're living the dream, I guess, at that point.
right. So I am preparing a workshop course for the spring, where we're going to combine human-centered design and life-centered design, looking at issues of food waste and its relationship to climate change.
Oh, amazing.
So what we're thinking that we'll do in that is have a couple of different modules. One's kind of more of a human-centered approach. So we might say, okay, let's focus on food waste in households, right? So
There's a lot.
like what are the human-centered interventions that might take to? Then we do another module around kind of life-centered thinking. So if we kind of go beyond the individuals in the household and what their needs are and how to better satisfy those needs, let's examine what are the life cycle implications of those choices, and then use that to refine, reframe, develop kind of like a next set of prototypes and solutions. And then the third piece, we're trying to figure out, it's like some kind of combination, but kind of all through here, we'll be doing, okay, like what is the human user satisfaction with the solutions? Okay, what's the carbon footprint implications of that solution? So that then we'd, come to something and have to figure out, okay, like, is there a framework that we can develop in years to balance these different set of criteria? And so that's what we're hoping to develop, and I think it should be fun.
Well, good luck with that. That sounds like a really cool class. And I don't necessarily wish I was a grad student again, but maybe good for that. Weslynne, thanks for being on Climify. It was a pleasure talking to you. And one more time, where can we find out more about your work into systems thinking and circular economies and everything else that you do?
So probably the easiest place is through the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. And the website for that is id.iit.edu.
Thanks, Weslynne. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Same here. Thank you.
This podcast is written, produced, and engineered by me. Design by Bashul Rashik and Mark O'Brien, with music by Casual Motive. Next week on Climify, we'll be joined by Kate Yoder. She's a news editor at Grist, the nonprofit independent media organization dedicated to telling stories of climate solutions and a just future. Kate will join us to talk about the mental health impacts of climate change, good climate messaging, how to talk about the cost of climate action, and the interesting concept of designing by subtraction.
And I worked on this piece last year that some psychologists and behavioral scientists had come up with this idea of subtraction. They called it subtraction, but there was a paper in Nature about it. And essentially it's the idea that, people will overlook the option of getting rid of elements. And instead they'll want to add new ones. There's sort of that impulse behind build back better, right? It's
right.
From a design standpoint, we're always thinking of how can we improve things? And there's well, you're forgetting about the easiest option, which is we can just take these things away.
Thanks for listening to Climify. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. To catch all the latest on Climify, you can follow us on Instagram at Climify Podcast. Climify is part of Climate Designers. Learn more at climatedesigners.org/edu.